Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon, and I'm one of the co-owners and managing directors with Impetus Digital. Impetus Digital builds some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration tools. We enable life science companies, pharmaceutical, biotech, medical device companies to be able to work collaboratively and virtually from any device at any place and location, to be able to run things like virtual advisory boards, working groups, steering committees, run medical education programs. And since COVID-19, we've been virtualizing POA brand rollouts and sales and MSL training. But really what's most important here is what we believe at Impetus. And we will really believe that everything starts with a thought. And from a thought comes big conversations. And then we can actually truly move the needle on some of these big, hairy, audacious goals that we're all collectively trying to contribute to positively disrupt healthcare. And so by leveraging, the Impetus YouTube channel and our podcast, and ultimately our platform, is we're looking to working with the provocateurs like the Denises and the Fards of the world, the bleeding edge thinkers, people who are doing things that are truly different beyond the pill conversations and taking things up a level. So we're certainly very, very pleased to be having two really awesome thinkers and digging deep into some very cool things that Fard and Denise are working on. So let me actually introduce the two of them. First of all, Fard Johnmar is a globally respected thought leader. He's considered a futurist in the medical space and a strategist in the digital health and technology arena. He's the founder and president of Enspektos. This is actually a digital health innovation consultancy, and he specializes in strategy, research, as well as in training. He's also the founder of the Digital Health Maven project, and he also hosts the digitalhealthmaven.edu podcast. He actually regularly produces proprietary research, and he focuses specifically on consumers and how they're going to use and respond to various digital health technologies in the future, and more importantly, how digital is contributing to perceptual and behavior change amongst patients, caregivers, and all sorts of other stakeholders. But that's not all. Fard, in addition, works in the digital health arena. He has extensive experience in health marketing and communications. He develops a range of global and domestic strategies and programs for large pharmaceutical companies, nonprofits, government agencies, and marketing and advertising firms. He has also worked extensively with startups focused on big data, population health, wellness, and a whole assortment of other areas. He is the co-author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, ePatient 2015, 15 Surprising Trends Changing Healthcare. I also want to take a few minutes to also introduce Denise Pines. She's joining Fard today, and she is actually the president of the Medical Board of California, and she serves on the Martin Luther King Community Hospital Foundation. She's an award-winning marketer and a serial entrepreneur, and she's participated in 10 startups, including multimedia companies, as well as a variety of foundations. She's been a creative consultant for several talk shows as well as documentaries. And you can see her creative flair with all the great colors that we see here today. She's an event planner, and she's directed over 150 national events and designed marketing strategies that has put 3 books on the New York Times bestseller list in 1 year. She is a Master of Business Administration. She's focused on international business from the John F. Kennedy University, and is a longtime community health advocate. She's demonstrated a history of working in the medical practice industry. Before her current role, she was the president of the Smiley Group for over 20 years. And she's also the co-founder of Tea Botanics and Women in the Room Productions. So together, Fard and Denise have co-authored the FemAging and the FemAging in the COVID-19 era reports. And both of these focus on female health outside of fertility and parenthood. So a long intro, but again, only scratch the surface of the amazing things that both of you have accomplished over the years. So welcome, and so happy to have you on the show.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, Denise. We just need to have you unmuted as well.
Okay, perfect.
So awesome. So we, I just want to kind of get started here is, you obviously have all kinds of interesting background. How did you end up meeting each other? And how on earth, based on these, the great things that you've been doing in the past, did you converge and decide that you were equally interested in this whole female aging concept? Tell us the story.
Wow. We met a while ago. I can't even remember exactly when, but I do remember how I got introduced to Fard, and it was him actually talking about e-health in a webinar that he was giving. And he has such historical context on health. I had really not seen someone in the e-space around health who went back to understand the health journey, right? Like the healthcare journey. And he went way back into the 17 and 1800s and then brought it forward to where we are. And I just was so impressed. And I thought, I just got to meet this guy and we've got to talk further. And so that sort of just led us, to have a friendship. And then when I sort of started getting into looking at developing a product, a health product for women specifically, Fard was the first person that I wanted to talk to about that. And from that, we just started developing and creating, and that's led us to where we are today.
So you're obviously very famous, Fard, as it relates to ePatients. So kind of a pioneer in the space. You've been talking about these things before it ever became something that was trendy and we start using, patient centricity and what does this all look like? And then you went ahead and wrote this book, ePatient 2015. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey through the years, through the conversations with the work with life science and other healthcare stakeholders that brought you into a place of understanding and interest and desire on navigating this whole ePatient concept?
Yeah, so I also just want to say, working with Denise has been a real pleasure over the years as well. And, we've had so many great conversations and things that we've been able to work on together, and working on FemAging has been a great pleasure. In terms of ePatients, ePatient 2015, I was approached by my co-author, Rohit Bhargava, who's a very well-known strategist and futurist himself, to really focus in on what over the next few years are going to be issues that people are focusing on in healthcare. And this was before people started talking a lot about things like big data and these empathetic interfaces, the chatbots and the robots. And so what we wanted to do with that book was to present a landscape, a canvas of what the healthcare future would look like. And we wrote this book, it's called ePatient 2015, but we wrote it, I think in 2012 or so. So this was, years before people started talking about a lot of these issues. And so one of the things that I've always been intrigued by related to digital technologies is the intersection between the technology and the human. And this also has an impact on the work that Denise and I are doing with FemAging. And that the most important thing for me has always been, what is the human reaction to these technologies? So when I first started working on digital technologies, the big thing everybody was talking about was Web 2.0, if you remember that, social media and blogging. And people were really intrigued by this idea that patients themselves were becoming the experts and collaborating directly with clinicians to understand their conditions. And so one of the first things that I did way back in 2005 was to work on a report that was about 100 pages or so, focusing on what I called the emerging healthcare blogosphere. And blogs seem so old-fashioned, but back in those days, they were really new, and people just didn't know what they were all about. So I interviewed people like Kevin MD, who's now very famous with his blog, and other folks that were in the healthcare space to basically say, what are the human implications as well as the innovation implications of these blogs. And so that approach, looking at the human side of the technological boom, has really driven my work in working with government agencies and life science companies and device companies and startups all around the world. And so getting to the FemAging phenomenon, when Denise and I were talking about this issue, we immediately, both Denise and I have this focus on the human. And so we immediately said, okay, number one, we're not seeing a lot of innovations for older women. And number two, if we were to develop these innovations for older women, between the ages of 40 and 65, what do they want? Because one of the things that I found across the time that I've been dealing with technological innovation is that the technology tends to be foregrounded and the human tends to be in the background. And so by taking that human-centric approach that I've always taken and Denise has, we were able to come together to be thinking about women's health in a different way than what we've seen with some of the types of activities and the types of products and services that have been real areas of focus up until now.
That's fascinating. Really, really love that. And the way sometimes how the world and the universe brings people together and you end up converging with very similar ideas. So I'd like to explore that a little bit further with you, Denise, is that you were saying, you're obviously working with multiple different boards and groups. Tell us about why you were being driven to create a product. What was it? Was that what superseded these discussions, or was it the principle of, I feel really inclined, or I'm really being driven by this 45, or this 40 to 65-year-old cohort? What was the driver that brought you into this space?
Personal. I'm that woman, right? So I'm that woman. And when I became that woman, right, at first I wasn't that woman, but then I became that woman. And I realized that I was like all the other women who became that woman, meaning there wasn't anything for us. And that no one was preparing us as we got into sort of this phase in our life from a healthcare standpoint, when we started noticing that we were having particular health challenges. And so that really was the impetus for me personally to co-partner with a doctor and to create something that ended up happening to me, which was a hot flash. And so we created this product called Hot Flash Tea, and we put that out on the market. And as a result of that, it led me to having women talk to me all the time and sharing with me things that they had not been sharing with even their doctors. And I thought, wow, this is crazy. Because every woman is going, in the entire world is going to go through this journey of perimenopause to menopause. And so why isn't there more information? Why are women not able to go to doctors and talk to their doctors? Or why when they do, their doctors don't really have information for them? They typically tell them, kind of like wait it out, like it's a surf ride or something, just wait it out, and it'll go by. Well, a woman could be in this state for 10 years. So you expect them to be suffering for 10 years in this sort of wait out phase? And so I've realized that we are living in a very antiquated health environment when it comes to women's health as they age. And the focus of women's health, women's health really is centered around fertility and parenthood and period. And anything that's outside of that is really kind of ignored or not researched or not funded. And that is what we factually really unveiled in doing this report and doing this study, is that, women, we discovered there was a menopause gap, that women who are, 60% of the women who are seeking treatment only are finding that treatment 8% of the time in the healthcare industry. And if you are a person of color, specifically an African-American woman or a Hispanic woman, your number is even lower, it's 5%. So here we have 60% of the women in this age group looking for healthcare help and treatment, but only 8% in the macro are getting it and 5% if you're a person of color. That is, I mean, like, that's crazy. And no one's calling this out. Like, no one's ringing the bell like, hello, we have a problem here. So of course, when you look at technology, that's healthcare. When you look at technology addressing this issue, you find it even more dire, right? And so that really became the, that really spurred us to say, let's put something, let's research this more. Let's find out about women's preferences. What is it that they really want? What are they looking for in technology? And so when we sort of look at technology, we encompassed it around the notion of innovations, right? And so that allows us to bring in nutraceuticals and clothing, as well as software and devices and a particular kind of equipment into that conversation for women 40 to 65.
That's wonderful. And there's so many great nuggets there. And I want to kind of linger on each of those little digestible components. So Fard, maybe we can just take it back a moment, because there was a lot shared there. Is you and Denise recently conducted some research and have generated two really important reports. The first one is called FemAging 2020, and the second one is FemAging in the COVID-19 era. I was wondering if you can share with us collectively some of these key insights. I know that Denise has shared some of these already, but what were some of the core nuggets that were produced from that, and which ones were things that surprised you?
Right. So both of these reports, the FemAging 2020 report, really was based on some data that we collected late 2019. And we were actually planning on releasing this research earlier this year in January, and then we had COVID-19. Essentially what we found in the FemAging 2020 report was that women between the ages of 40 and 65 are very much worried about their ability to age in a healthy and active way. And what we also found is that, amongst all of these women, about 55% said this. But when we look at women of color, we look at Hispanic women and we look at African-American women, the incidence of women being worried about their ability to age in a healthy and graceful way increases by almost 10%. And so just looking at that statistic and thinking about what that means practically is really, really important. You have a group of women that are really worried about their ability to be active. And so it's almost as if you're taking someone who certainly was very confident about their ability to age well or in the past, and now they're looking at the next 20 years of their life and they're very, very concerned about their ability to do this. The second thing that we found was that the issue of stress and anxiety were very, very significant for all women, especially African-American women. We found that the focus on stress and anxiety was prevalent. And when we did our follow-up study, the COVID-19 research, we found that many, many women were saying that the COVID-19 crisis was going to have an impact on their mental and physical health for not just months, but years and decades to come. And so we released this research during a time when, at least in North America, there was a hope that the COVID-19 crisis would quickly be behind us, that we would, socially distance and that we would isolate, and then, we'd be able to go back to our normal lives. But what we found is that these women were almost oracles, that they said, listen, this is not going to be something that disappears now. It's going to be something that's lingering with us for quite some time. And so what that issue around aging well, that issue of mental health and well-being were very, very clear in the research. The other thing that we found was that there is a disconnect between the types of products and services from an innovation perspective that these women were focused on versus what was actually available in the market. So with the FemAging research, FemAging 2020, we actually conducted 2 studies and published them at once. The first study was the FemAging Index, which is the nationally representative in the United States study of 1,000 women, where we posed many, many questions to them about issues such as their ability to age well. We also wanted to know, what are the types of products and services that you're interested in? The second bit of research that we did was to say, well, what's actually out there that's specifically focusing on the FemAging cohort, these women between the ages of 40 and 65. And so we conducted a global search for these organizations. We found about 70 companies that were specifically focusing on this issue, and we compared their offerings to what these women told us they wanted. And what we found is that there's certainly companies that are focused on issues such as menopause, but there were fewer organizations and innovators focused on issues like stress and anxiety and mental health, and very few focused on issues such as incontinence and vaginal issues. So these are all things that people are very, very uncomfortable talking about. They're very uncomfortable talking about mental health. They're very uncomfortable talking about bladder health, very uncomfortable talking about vaginal health, but these are real issues for women. And what we tried to do was to kind of bring what my friend Susanna Fox, who is the former CTO at HHS, likes to call the unmentionables. We want to bring the unmentionables to light. And so with the FemAging 2020 research and the FemAging and the COVID-19 era, we tried to do that. And what we also did from an innovation perspective is that we identified a new industry sector called FemAging tech, which relates to innovations that are specifically focused on women between the ages of 40 and 65 and go beyond the issues of fertility and parenthood, which receive a lot of investment and attention right now in healthcare. So I think the message here with this particular research is that there's a huge gap in the need, that there are serious issues that need to be addressed, and that from an innovation perspective, there is an opportunity to develop these FemAging tech innovations in ways that are sensitive to the most important needs of these women.
Yeah, brilliant. And that is, there's a huge need there. And I think what's been interesting since COVID-19, the silver lining behind this terrible pandemic is, I think it's accelerated change and thinking that's truly disruptive. I think it's opening doors to a lot of these e-technologies that we would have never considered to be normal or even possible. Mm-hmm. So I just want to step back before we start looking at some of the solutions and some of the ideas that you have started to move ahead with. We can never learn until we look back and sort of maybe decipher some of the reasons and the rationale. Why do you think, Denise, that there has been such a gigantic gap? Why has industry, technology, innovation, funding, reimbursement been so focused on women under the age of 45, and more specifically under the age of 45 who are not Hispanic or Black or anything else? Like, what is causing that rift or that separation?
It's not that there's something causing it. It's what has existed for a period of, forever, honestly. And is that, one, the medical industry is male dominated, right? So because of that women's value has been associated with the ability to have children, right? The value of a woman is her ability to have children. And once you can't have children, society says, well, there's no need for you anymore. And so we still find that, as antiquated as I just said that, and it sounds to you, this is still permeating in the structural and systematic foundations of tech companies, of the healthcare industry. And until we start to see a change in that industry, and what I mean by that is more women getting into that, and then women aging inside those industries, and then recognizing there's something that's missing for them as they go along that journey, then we'll start to see more of a change towards that. But that's really the foundational root cause of, why we find that we have a menopause treatment gap, why we find we have an innovation gap. I mean, even the mere fact that femtech is new, meaning that it's been around for maybe 5 to 6 years and starting to get funding and getting some traction, is also ridiculous, right? I mean, women have very specific needs that are very different from what men needs are. And when we look at even both these groups, the groups of women who are trying to have children and raising those kids that they have, to the women who have already had their children and now moving to the next phase, the size of those audiences are actually almost the same, right? They're about 52 million and 53 million. Yet the one that's 53 million, the older women, are more successful. They financially are more stable and have more money, and they have more political clout. And so you would think that here you have a group ready and primed for products. And as these women get older, I mean, they're forever changing. I mean, they're almost like younger women who are constantly changing and trying new products, because these women's bodies have changed to such a degree that their hair has changed. So they're trying new hair products. Their skin is drying. They're trying new beauty products. And you would think that corporations would be running after these women who have money to keep buying these things because they're keep trying to find the solution for themselves. So, I mean, it's a fascinating conversation that just really hasn't happened. And I'm so glad that we actually put this report together, because I think it's allowing for this dialogue to happen.
I know, it kind of blows your mind when you think about it. And I recall a couple of years ago at one of the consumer electronics shows, where I think this kind of got blown out of the water when some people were talking about some female sexual tools, and then apparently it didn't win one of the awards, and I think it created all kinds of controversy, and I think it started to shine some light on the disparity and the inequality, if you will, between what's considered male-focused versus female-focused technologies. And I think it certainly speaks to this as well. And I think we're certainly in this time right now. Yeah. I mean, the white elephant is in the room around a lot of the social unrest that we're seeing, the economic upheaval, the climate issues, this confluence of tidal wave that's happening right now, that I think we can leverage this as a groundswell and an opportunity for shining the light on some of the things that you've just been describing. But I think I'd be remiss, Fard, not to really ask this question. We've got this opportunity with women who are over the age of 45, for all of the myriad of different things that we've just talked about. At the same time, we realize that this could potentially be a cohort of people who may not be as tech savvy. So we've got the issues and we have the challenges, but we're looking also at a lot of femtech and solutions that are very technology oriented. How do we actually bridge the gap on what that looks like moving forward for that particular population of women?
Sure. So one of the things that I just want to emphasize is the fact that this population of women are actually very tech savvy. For example, one of the things that we found was that about 33% of these women are using voice-enabled technologies such as Alexa and Siri. Now, these technologies are all in our homes, but what we're finding is that they're relying on these technologies for everything from shopping lists to cooking timers, and having a virtual assistant in the home, a voice-enabled assistant in the home, is a relatively new phenomenon. And it's something that people, I think, see, but they don't recognize the power of that particular solution. So from a technological perspective, one of the things that we have to, one of the notions that we have to disabuse ourselves of is the fact that these women aren't using technology and that there's actually a gap. They're using these tools and they're quite active, and that's one of the things that we found in the research. The second thing I'd like to do is to expand our horizons related to what it means to say the word innovation. Generally, when people talk about innovation, they think about technologies such as mobile devices or wearables or even voice-enabled technologies. What we looked at from an innovation perspective was to say innovation means beauty. Innovation means clothing. innovation means sexual health aids. Innovation means incontinence aids, right? So these are not things that require technological savvy to use, but a piece of clothing that you can wear that cools your body when you are experiencing a hot flash. That doesn't require anyone to do anything but be aware that it's there and learn how to put on a shirt, which we've been doing since we were 3 years old, right? So there are two things I'd like to communicate. It's the fact that technology doesn't just mean gadgets, that there certainly is an adoption gap when it comes to certain types of solutions, but these women are really ahead of the curve in some ways. And that innovation doesn't just mean devices, but these really amazing NASA developed technologies that are being embedded in clothing that cools you when you're having a hot flash. That's a significant issue. Quality of life situation for someone who's experiencing heavy hot flashes. So from an innovation perspective, what we'd like to communicate here is that there's a lot of opportunity to expand our minds about what innovation means. And when you do that, there are new opportunities for products and services and innovations that could be potentially quite profitable, might be coming to the fore. And so we're finding that in our conversations, for example, with investors. We're having a lot of conversations right now with investors that are trying to think about this in a new way. And recently in a conversation for an investor that had been focused primarily on fertility and parenthood, they realized, well, wait a minute, these women who are mothers are surrounded by their mothers and by other women who are dealing with these situations. So is there an opportunity for us to have kind of these concentric circles of innovation that, yes, we might have a fertility product or a parenthood product, but that we can reach these women who are willing and able to engage with us in new ways through that primary customer. So one of the things that I always advocate for is to expand our horizons when it comes to innovation and to break out of the schemas and the assumptions that we make about what it really means.
Absolutely. I think that is so important. And I love the fact that you're speaking about the investor as well, because there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration, opportunities for partnerships, and all kinds of things like that. And so, Denise, we talked a little bit earlier when one of the main issues that's coming up is really around mental health, issues around depression. Certainly we hear a lot about that as people are entering or exiting through their menopausal years. And certainly there's probably been an exacerbation of that since COVID-19. What have you been hearing about on that realm with the people you've been speaking with since this pandemic, since the launch of this tea that you've been talking about in your travels? And I think the other question for you on this is, I've also heard that there's a large percentage of the population that have really gravitated towards things like chat bots. We've heard of Wobot, other cognitive behavioral therapy tools that are coming in the format of little robots and things, that people feel safer and more secure and more open to speaking to machines and robots and algorithms than they are to potentially a biased human being. So can you speak a little bit about mental health, the issues around people needing these kinds of supports, and where you potentially see this advent of telemedicine and telehealth being able to break in and be able to provide support to women who are over the age of 45?
So mental health, mental health during this time of COVID didn't just happen, right? I think that mental health has been this underlying issue that's really been in our society for a long time that we haven't wanted to talk about or identify. And we've found that in the alternative world, the world of yoga and meditation, that they have recognized it. And actually we've seen a rise in that, so much so that we know what yoga, when somebody says it, we know what that is. When we say meditation, we know what that is. I would probably say 10, 12 years ago, if you had said some of those terms to people, they would quite not know what you're talking about. So that side of the world is rising and recognizing it and starting to provide solutions in a way that people who feel that they need something can go to these sort of softer areas. In the more traditional route of a psychologist or sociologist, we still feel a stigma of wanting to move into that direction to actually get care. And we have to actually want to get that care, right? It can't be forced on us. It's not something that, you know, someone can dictate or mandate that we have go and have a mental health expert talk to us. I mean, even as I sit on the medical board, when we identify that we have a doctor that has a mental issue, you know, we have to really regulatory force that doctor to have an evaluation, right? Even when everyone around them knows there's something going on and something wrong. So again, this is a freedom that we have of choosing to seek out help. But what COVID has did with containing us inside of a space, it's allowed that to start to surface, because now I'm with this person and I can see this person, or I'm with myself and I find that I'm anxious, I'm uncomfortable, I'm starting to have some feelings that I hadn't really had before. And so we're starting to identify these things and we're starting to talk about that. There's more articles in, you know, like the New York Times and the Washington Post talking about this. So we're actually having a dialogue on a national, global level around mental health that didn't really exist before, right? And so that's the good side of that. Now, the next side is how we're going to get service. Can telemedicine begin to be one of those instruments? And telemedicine, we have to understand, is still highly regulated. I mean, every state, and I'm only going to speak about the US, every state had to waive some laws to allow massive telehealth to actually happen. Telehealth is a very regulated environment. And so all the states waived certain things. Now what everyone is doing is evaluating, we found so many people went this direction. We found even older people. And when I say older, I mean 80 plus people engaged in telehealth. Maybe this is something here to stay. How do we do that? The regulations that everybody waived are only temporary. They're attached to the governor's executive orders. So the minute those executive orders end, all of the telehealth waivered regulations all go back, which mean the way people are engaging in telehealth will not be engaged this way, right? So all of the states are reevaluating the laws that we have associated with telehealth, and what are the things that we want to deregulate in this sense. So yes, telehealth is here. We've started to embrace it. What we are starting to find is that people actually are preferring to go back to their doctor now that states have started to open up and allow physical appointments to happen. So we found that, yes, I'll do it because this is the only way for me to see my doctor, but my preference is still an in-person visit. But I do think too that what we have found is that in those areas that are rural, in those areas that don't have a lot of specialists, like inner city communities, that telehealth can be a viable instrument for those areas. And that I think we'll see an increase in use in those areas in particular.
Very, very interesting. I wanted to ask you, Fard, on, you know, again, some of the disparities and some of the excavation that we're talking about, especially around FemAging and the division and the inclusion versus the exclusion. I think one of the things that we've routinely seen in the past is that there's been somewhat of an underrepresentation of older women, frail women, women of color, transgendered, you know, a whole series of different things in clinical studies. And this is part of the crux, if you will, of what you had deemed as innovation, be it clothing, be it beauty products, be it products for sexual health or incontinence. They could be big pharma generated or just some big, consumer electronic company. So people need to be able to input data So can you speak a little bit about what you have seen in the past? Has COVID-19 accelerated inclusion? Is it making it worse? What do you see in the future around clinical studies and input from some of these marginalized populations?
So I think that the issue of disparities in clinical trials is one that obviously predates COVID. One of the things that I found in the patient first movement that has emerged is that sometimes I speak to some of the CEOs of the companies and I'll say things like, I'm interested in potentially working with you around XYZ research. What's your representation among African American and Hispanic people? And oftentimes they'll say, well, we have trouble with that. And it also extends to clinical trials, and that there's especially among, and I'm speaking about the United States and African Americans in particular, the history of African Americans and Hispanics and the healthcare system is one of extreme prejudice and extreme harm. And so there's a significant distrust of the medical industry when it comes to participating in clinical trials. And there needs to be a lot of encouragement and work done to encourage people of color to actually engage in those types of activities because of the issues related to just the extreme harm that has occurred. Now, in the COVID-19 era, one of the things that I think we've seen in terms of the vaccine development and distrust of what's happening from that perspective as to whether or not those vaccines are going to be safe, whether they're going to be effective across different populations. There are questions about the neutrality of the research process when it comes to vaccines. And so, one of the things from an innovation perspective, if we're talking about clinical trials in general, is that people have worked very hard to include communities of color in the areas of clinical research as well as innovation. Now, focusing on what we did with the FemAging tech work, is we specifically looked at whether or not these particular solutions were either including people of color in their marketing and their language, or were specifically focused on women of color. And we found that a significant percentage of these particular innovators, at least on the surface level, in terms of how they advertise these solutions or communicate about these solutions from an imagery perspective, were including women of color. So there seems to be a focus from an innovation perspective on that. But at the same time, from a FemAging perspective in particular, there were certain things that women of color really, really wanted that were not in these solutions. And so from an innovation perspective, there's an opportunity to look at those differences and work to meet those needs, because there's an opportunity to develop products and services from that perspective. So I think when we go back to look at innovation in general, sometimes the thing that prevents people from innovating in a way that's very, very forward thinking is just lack of knowledge and the understanding of how to even tackle these issues. So sometimes you might want to have something targeted toward women of color, but you get very basic questions like, well, how do I even talk about this? Just communicate about it. I have no idea how to do that in a way that's appropriate, that won't turn them off as opposed to bringing them in. And it's the same thing from a clinical trial perspective. How do we talk to communities of color about participating in the process in a way that they feel safe and they don't feel that they're being exploited? So there's a lot of sensitivity that needs to come into play when trying to innovate for these particular communities, as well as develop from a clinical research perspective and including their voice. It's just very, very difficult when you're someone who maybe is thinking about these issues but doesn't know how to even begin the conversation. So there are opportunities to learn that. And I think with what we've done with the FemAging 2020 research is to provide a path forward in terms of interrogating those differences and trying to begin the process of meeting them.
I love that you brought up the word conversation. And so I think what we've done so far in our discussion today is we've talked a lot about the reasons, and we talked about the rationale and the background and the problem set and the challenges that this particular cohort of women who are over the age of 45, specifically women of color and Hispanics and other underrepresented populations, we've talked about what the issues are. And we're really suggesting that there's a whole opportunity, innovation set, group of people who are willing and able to start bridging that gap. But there's a gap, and we need to bridge that gap with a conversation. So Denise, tell us a little bit about some of these ideas that you and Fard have been considering on bridging that conversation gap. What is some of the educational initiatives that you are considering to help start educating people, populating the words that they need to be able to get their ideas across? Tell us a little bit about what you're planning moving forward.
I think part of it is just having these kind of conversations that we're having with you, Natalie, today. So we're working on having more and more of these conversations so that this doesn't sound new to people anymore, right? Because once we get past newness, then we can get to the next step, which is doing something about what you just heard, right? But if it's still not anything you've heard, we have to still start to have those conversations. So we are working to do a number of podcasts, sort of our own virtual event, things like that. I talk about it in the circles that I find myself in, right? With I'm with doctors, I'm with regulators. So I bring up this conversation, and a lot of times it's uncomfortable for people. When I start talking about it, their eyes are almost like, like I just said a dirty word or something. So getting people to stretch themselves, even just in a conversation inside the health industry. It's almost surprising. So I think those are the things we do. One of the things that I have done is I created a platform called Wise Pause. And we just 2 Saturdays ago did a big virtual conversation talking to women all day long about their health, right? From hormones to sexual health, mental health, incontinence to beauty. We had someone talk about Botox and fillers, as well as someone on the natural side talk about, how do you achieve some of those things through acupressure, acupuncture, microcurrent, to other modalities that actually help provide stress relief for your body, that aren't things that a lot of people know about, but these things exist. Some of it is very ancient, like acupuncture, and some of it is new, like cryotherapy. So trying to have an A to Z conversation with women directly, using, doctors who are very well versed, and practitioners who are very well versed on this issue. So we did this event, and we had people all over the world, from Abu Dhabi and Australia, the UK, Italy, all participated, including the UK. So it's something that we'll do again. We started these last year as in-person events, and this year we went virtual. So really getting women to start advocating for themselves so that they actually start becoming the ones requesting more from their doctors, right? And the more you request from your doctor, the more your doctor has to step it up. So no more going to the doctor and him saying, it'll pass. That doctor who said it passed, he's got to take himself up or herself up a notch to understand more about what's happening to their own patients.
That's fantastic and so wonderful and amazing. And congratulations on sounds like a fantastic event. This actually begs the question of partnerships. And as we all know, the energy goes where the money flows. And so to be able to truly continue with this innovation flow in these process with pharmaceutical, medical device companies, et cetera, they need to be able to see this glimmer of hope, opportunity, interested parties. And have you considered, Fard, the idea of creating a nonprofit, a patient association, specifically on FemAging, where you can actually bridge the gap with technology investors, pharmaceutical companies who may want to spearhead specific new products or extend their pills, for example, loss of exclusivity with something that's innovative that will actually extend their patents, to just being able to find patients of specific parameters for their clinical studies, because they're always looking for people where there's a cloister of patients with specific parameters. Is that something in consideration between you, Fard, and Denise about what the future looks like for FemAging?
Right, so we call this particular initiative the FemAging Project. And what that means is that there are a lot of different activities that we could engage in. I think initially our focus is on three things. The first is just to get people comfortable about talking about this concept of FemAging. Denise and I came up with the term FemAging, and it was a very, very specific reason. And the reason is we have to start with how we communicate, and we need to give people new language that they can start to use to talk about this in a way that's understandable to them. The second stage is through communication and then education. So we're doing initiatives, such as our virtual event, which we're planning, which is going to bring together people from different parts of the healthcare industry, as well as patients and others, to learn about and talk about and forge alliances under the umbrella of what we're doing with the FemAging Project. We think that once we have that successful, we hope, virtual event that brings together these various stakeholders, that then we will have then a foundation for talking about more specific things that can be done across driving innovation across these areas, bringing these different groups of people together. And so we haven't decided upon what that's actually going to be, but I think our first focus is on the education, communication, and then gathering phases. And then once we get past that, then we can say, okay, now that we have these people who are aware, they're educated, they understand, what can we do next? And so we're very interested in having that longer term conversation and being able to drive those partnerships in ways that are appropriate for the various stakeholders that we think we're going to be able to bring together under this FemAging project.
Beautiful. And last, while we're just at the top of the hour, Denise, any watchouts, concerns? We hear a lot about patient security, health data privacy. We hear a lot around the digital divide and the haves and the have-nots. And we were just talking about telehealth would fit really, really well in the inner city, except a lot of those people don't have internet. So can you speak at all to what this is going to look like moving forward?
I think everyone is bought into innovation and technology, going hand in hand with healthcare, right? But yes, in terms of the security, that's always going to be an issue. Once you're starting to transfer files here, there, and everywhere about people's privacy, and that's going to be really, really important. I mean, healthcare can't give away your data. Doesn't have the ability to sell your data like a corporation can sell your data, right? Even if it's selling your data, obviously without your name attached to it, still can't do that. We still have those kind of privacy and HIPAA laws that are in place and will remain in place. I don't see people actually relinquishing those particular privacy rights. But I think that we can learn other ways, right? We can learn by doing like what Fard and I did in terms of being able to pull this report and unveiling something that a lot of people weren't aware about, even the menopause gap, right? I mean, a lot of people are stunned by that particular data in and of itself, let alone the innovation aspect of the data. So I think that, health is, there's constant conversations. What COVID has done is it has accelerated technology in education and in healthcare in ways that it would have taken 10 years to get to where we are right now, which is forced adoption of telehealth, forced adoption of educational learning, right? So now we're in this space. So now it's about one, the healthcare industry raising up their technology game. One of the people who were able to react the fastest to COVID and respond were those who had actually more sophisticated technology within the structure of their organizations. They were able to move extremely fast. And those who weren't able to move fast, those who found themselves having challenges, were the ones who found they didn't have a technology base that was much more sophisticated. So I think that this notion, this sort of fusion of health and technology is now here to stay. And now it's about what do we do with it, right? So let's do good. Let's start helping people we haven't been helping. Let's start helping women who are older. Let's start helping people of color who have limited access to healthcare. Let's start getting healthcare in rural areas where people are far away. Now we can really do that.
I love it. I could literally speak to you guys for hours, and there is so much here. We're just at the precipice of something truly unique, truly exciting, and we're talking to the pioneers right here. You heard it, folks. FemAging came from Denise and Fard, so we can't wait to see what this is going to look like in the future. So tons going on here. We are going to be leaving the links to reach Denise and Fard. Should you be interested in talking, collaborating, seeing what other sorts of collaborations and partnerships might be available and possible. So we will leave those below. But also for you to remember that these are the kinds of discussions that we like to have at Impetus through our asynchronous and our synchronous virtual tools. Having these ongoing discussions. How can we provoke thinking? How can we provoke disruptive ways of accelerating and continuing these change in healthcare so that we can, again, collectively do things differently in the future. So please connect with us at Impetus as well if you're interested in any of our tools, especially something that we're launching soon called Insight Event to be able to hold regular conferences and education events. So thank you to all of you who are listening to this meeting. I want to thank Denise and Fard for your brilliant ideas, and can't wait to hear more about what's going on, and wishing everybody a wonderful afternoon ahead.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Natalie, for having us. Very much appreciated.